everyone, welcome to Wrote Reviews. Today we're reviewing Geography Club and we've got something special for you. Brent Hartinger came to talk to us about his experience as the author who wrote it when it became a movie and his experience with optioning the script. So let's welcome Brent.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wrote Reviews. This is episode number 5.
Woohoo!
So, high five. No. Anyways, we have Brent Hartinger in the hot seat today. We're going to talk about his journey with the Geography Club, one of his earlier novels, and then the progression to the movie that was made from it and the journey you took on it. So, Brent, tell us how it all went down.
I actually think the story of the movie, and frankly the book too, is more interesting than the actual movie, which we will get to later. And you sort of have to cast your mind back because it was such a completely different world. I mean, I think anybody who wasn't alive then, I mean, the older I get, I'm in my 50s now, and the older I get, the more I think about, I don't understand the 40s. I've been reading about the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, but I don't think I understand it at all, because all I know is what I see in movies, and having lived through, the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, it's so different than the movie version. Anyway, so I wrote a book called Geography Club back in the 90s. That was a young adult novel about a gay kid, and it was a really, really hard sell, even though a lot of editors read it and liked it. I mean, hundreds of editors read it and liked it. And we had a couple of editors that want to buy it for the various houses, but they would always come back and say, there's no market for a book about gay teens. And so, but we kept plugging away. And then finally in 1999, my agent sold it to HarperCollins, and they had no expectations at all. The editor took it to the acquisitions board and said, I really like this book. And they said, well, it's not going to sell. And they, it'll be low sales, but you can, but he said, I really think we should do it. And they said, okay, we still think it's not going to sell, but we'll give you a little bit of money. There was a $5,000 advance, which is nothing. And so then things proceeded along. And before publication, Alex Sanchez's Rainbow Boys came out. And I remember thinking, oh, well, that's it. I'm done. there can't ever be 2 young adult novels about a gay kid. So he's stolen my thunder and it's all over. What's the point? Thinking my mind, we hadn't had that paradigm shift yet. And it's like, there's room for 1 gay young adult novel. That's it. So anyway, it finally came out in 2000, early 2003. And it was like a huge hit right out of the, I got an email from my editor and he said, good news, we've gone into a second printing. This is the first week of publication. And he said, more good news. In between the time we decided to go into the second printing, we're going into a third printing. I don't know why they didn't just call that one big printing, but they didn't. So it was like, it's already the third printing by Friday of the first week. So it's a big hit right out of the gate. HarperCollins had no expectations at all. This was a complete shock to everybody, even though Alex's book had done well. And then David Levithan's book, which would come out later that same year, Boy Meets Boy, that would do really well too. So, oh my God, maybe there is a market for a book about gay teens. So within the third week, you think? But I mean, I didn't know. I mean, nobody knew. There's conventional wisdom, and I've been told by literally hundreds of editors, there's no market for this book.
Right.
And so after a while, it's like you think, yeah, okay. And part of me thinks, had the book come out in 1999, it might have tanked. There might have been no market because, books and art, it exists in sort of a reciprocal relationship with the audience. And there's always going to be that hardcore, there were gay people, but that's not enough to make a hit. You need to drive the wedge into the culture at large. And if the culture isn't ready, it's just not ready. And that's the sad truth. I mean, when I was writing for After Elton, I would profile all of these great visionary musicians back in the 70s and movie makers who would do albums and they'd sell 1,000 copies and the films would tank. And sometimes they were good movies. Anyway, within the third week of publication, we were inundated with film offers. I think we had 12 different producers that were interested in turning Geography Club into a movie. So we sorted through all their offers and we went with one. The money was good. It was, I'm not gonna name production entities, but I will name dollar figures. I think it was $5,000 and $5,000 an option period. And I think that was a year, maybe it was 9 months. So for 9 months as they're developing the project, I get $5,000 in lieu of a bigger payout, which would be in $100,000, you know, percentage of the budget. This went on, they renewed the option a number of times. So I'm making a pretty little penny. Then a week before the option was expired, so 4 years later, so they've re-optioned it for 4 years in a row. So now we're at, I don't know, 2006. And we have all these, we still have all these other producers that have been coming to us in the meantime. And we're like, okay, they didn't get it made, let's try somebody else. And we had narrowed it down to a couple of other people. And then suddenly they're like, wait a minute, we want to re-option it. And at that point, they can't do it automatically. I have to authorize it. You know, you have an automatic renewal period, and then once that's over, you renegotiate. And so suddenly they're offering us literally the moon. I mean, like $20,000 per option period. Again, that's just the option. And then the purchase price is $100,000 later. And we're like, okay, something is going on here. You know, they have 2 weeks left in this option period. And finally they managed to convince somebody to finance the damn thing. And sure enough, there was, again, not naming production entities, there was a $15 million budget on the table for the Geography Club, the movie. And we're like, okay, well, let's take it. And then suddenly they pull it because the deal fell through. So, okay, all right, used to this. I'm used to this already. I've been a writer, you know, I've been a published writer 5 years, and I'm used to being jerked around, and I'm used to things changing on a dime. But we have these other producers, and so we sort through them. One of which was my agent had brought this to me, and the other one of which had come to me personally. And in the intervening 5 years or 4 years that the project had been developed, I'd written my own screenplay and I'd pitched it to them, and they hadn't been very interested. And I'd read their screenplay and I cried. I cried when I read their screenplay. It was so, you know, it's always hard for the author, but I was so disappointed in their take. It felt like it had nothing to do with my book. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I was really torn. My agent is leaning on me to take these guys that she knew personally, but I'm like, but they were not committing to using my screenplay. And these other guys, they're saying we have the financing and we love your screenplay and we will use your screenplay. And I really, really hemmed and hawed. The money was bigger with my agent's producing entity. But finally, you know, and I was thinking, could I have a guarantee production of my script, or could have a little bit more money and it's a slightly bigger project and the budget was bigger. So we went with them. So then they developed it for another 4 years. I mean, I will say, it's sort of fun to think, had the $15 million project happened with the earlier producing entity, we would have had Love, Simon in 2007. You know, it would have been like a big studio production, and it would have been 2007, 2006. But then I often ask myself, I'm not sure the audience would have been ready for Love, Simon in 2007, 2006. You know, we like to think that it would be. Mm-hmm. We like to think that it is what it is, but I'm not sure that wouldn't have come out and just tanked like a lot of those. I was reviewing movies back then, and a lot of good movies came out and a lot of them tanked. They just disappeared without a trace because, again, the audience wasn't ready. Anyway, so we went with the company that had not committed to using my screenplay. And sure enough, once the contract was signed, there was absolutely no question they were going to use my screenplay. It just wasn't going to happen. And I was disappointed. And then I read their screenplay. And again, I cried because it felt like they had sort of missed the point. And how frank do I want to be? I was, one of the things I'm really proud of Geography Club, it is a high school movie. It is set on a high school campus. It's sort of like about the pressure cooker of high school, at least in 2003 or 1999 when the book was written, 1998 when the book was written. It is about that experience and feeling like a gay kid on that experience. And there are no adults by design. It's a little bit like the comic strip Peanuts. You know, adults never appear. It's all about teenagers trying to recreate the crucible of my experience and an experience of a teenager in high school, where really the most important thing isn't your parents, it's your peers. You know, that is the most important thing. That was really important to me. The other thing, it felt like they had taken they kept the plot, which now we're talking 2007, 2008, 2009, felt a little retro to me about closeted kids, should I come out? Okay, so we ultimately went with the production company that had offered a little bit more money, but had not committed to using my screenplay. And sure enough, once the contract was signed, there was pretty much no question they were going to use my screenplay. They were going to go in their own direction. And I guess before I begin this part of the discussion, I want to say, these were all good people. Some of them became my friends. And this is just my opinion. This is my take. They'd have a different take. I don't want to come across as critical because I'm really grateful for the whole experience.
Sure.
But I do think, ultimately there are things I would have done differently. I gained a lot of wisdom. I mean, there's a line in the movie Mommy Dearest where Faye Dunaway is playing John Crawford, and when she says, "This ain't my first time at the rodeo, boys." And this, even by this point, this wasn't my first time at the rodeo. And ultimately, they were tasked with raising the money, and they were doing all the work. All I did was write the book. I didn't even write the screenplay since they were going in a different direction. And they paid me a lot of money. It was, I guess I can give specifics. The option was a little less. I think it was $2,000 a period every 9 months. But then the purchase price was, it's usually a percentage of the ultimate budget with a floor and a ceiling. And the purchase price was, it was upwards of $50,000 or around $50,000. So they were paying me a lot of money. This was an indie project as opposed to the previous project would have been a studio project, would have been a much higher budget. They were going for a lower budget. They were going, in the millions of dollars, lower millions of dollars. And so I don't want it to be like sour grapes, but right. I do have a perspective. And so they started working on it, and I read the first screenplay, and my heart sort of sank. I didn't cry, but my heart sort of sank because it felt like, Geography Club, the book had been written in 1998 and come out in 2003. And it was a really different environment. And the struggle for gay kids was not about, should I come out in high school? Maybe it's, should I come out in middle school or grade school? And that felt a little retro. And it also felt like, rather than go, the book that I wrote, Russell has a very strong point of view. He is funny. And that was the other thing. I mean, it sounds funny to think, but writing a YA novel in 1998 that is humorous was like a big deal. That was like challenging the conventional wisdom. Now it seems old hat because most YA novels have a really light, breezy tone. But back then, most gay art was really serious and tragic and gay bashing. And so I was really proud of that. I was really proud that Russell was wry and cheeky and he told jokes, and it wasn't about angst, and there was a bullying subplot. But anyway, I did think, are you sure you want to go this route? You want to go the retro plot and yet sort of the generic main character? And I expressed that, but they were going a different direction, which again, that was their right, because I'd signed the contract. So then they did get financing. It was budgeted at, I think it was purchased at 1.2 million or 1.3 million, something like that. The final budget came in a little under that, but it was a real movie, and they had Scott Bakula and a bunch of other lesser known characters, in supporting roles. And ultimately, I had said the two things that I really like about the book is it's set in a high school, and it's sort of the pressure cooker of high school, and there are no adults in the book. And that was sort of the one note I gave them. I said, don't cast any adults, have it all be teens, because that I think is one of the parts of the book that I'm really proud of. And when you are that age, my memory was, I didn't care what my parents thought. I cared what my peers thought. And that was what I was trying to create, for that sense of pressure and what will my friends think. And I did think, I wanted them to keep that. And that was the one thing I expressed. And they didn't keep it. And they said, well, we didn't keep it because we want to have these name actors in the script, which will help us sell the script. And it's a reasonable point. It's not a terrible point. But anyway, so they got the financing. This would have been 2010, 2011. They started filming. I was invited to set. It was a great time. They were wonderful. I mean, I was very, very, very much a spectator in the whole process. I was not a creative consultant in any way. They had given me the courtesy of showing me the screenplay, and they acted, they were very nice, the actors. And I did think the cast was fantastic. I was so pleased with the cast and the actors. They were all great. And I had a great time. I think I was there for 4 or 5 days. Again, there were little things like the whole reason why I didn't do football in the book is because I thought it was a cliche, and they thought, well, let's make it.
I actually like the fact that you did baseball, because I thought, how more Americana can you get?
Right. And
you know,
and
that's what I loved about the series.
It to me, football, at least then, felt like such a YA cliche, but they thought it would be more cinematic. And maybe they were right. You know, the football scenes are some of the best scenes in the movie. Again, I thought, is it a good idea to cast 20-year-olds and one of the actors was 29? But then, they explained to me, they did have an actor they really liked, and everybody read for this part. And a lot of people wouldn't take the part because it was a gay role, even in 2011. Everybody's patting themselves on their back these days about how pro-gay they are, but it wasn't even
not so much. Yeah,
it wasn't even a decade ago, and everybody was terrified of this because, again, in Hollywood, if it hasn't been done before, it's a big, big, big deal. I mean, even I'm working on a different gay teen project right now. And the fact that Boy Erased was such a big flop, I mean, we were all set to go, and then Boy Erased tanked. And then suddenly, oh my God, all the funding is pulled because everything is trend driven. And I am very reluctant to dump on people who move heaven and earth to get things done in an environment where it's difficult to get things done. I mean, it's easy to get things done, easier, relatively speaking, to get things done these days in an era of Love, Simon, in part because of Love, Simon. So I'm really critical, I'm reluctant to be critical of people who, it's an all new foreign landscape and they're just trying to get things done and they're just trying to make things work. And I get it. And maybe that's why they took a more conventional route with the characterization and a more conventional, they kept the sort of the retro stuff. It was a fun experience. I went to the premiere. There was a big premiere at the center in Los Angeles that was really awesome. But I mean, when I finally saw the rough cut, I did think, well, there's no third act. The movie doesn't really have a third act. It's very, very earnest. It feels like, part of the problem, I think, with gay movies, frankly, any movie that involves a social justice issue, and the vibe was very much, we want to make this movie because we want to make things better for gay youth. Gay youth are struggling and they're committing suicide, and we want to make a movie for gay youth. And ultimately, as an artist, I think that's just, you couldn't make a bigger mistake. I don't think audiences want to be lectured at. I don't think they want to be preached at. I don't think they want to go for a moral lesson. I think they want to go to be entertained. They want to tell a story. And I think in as much as you're trying to save lives with your gay project, your LGBTQ project, you are going the wrong direction. And it's great. I appreciate the sentiment, but artistically, I think it's always a problem. And I think audiences instantly.
Really? Here's my counter to that. You have Ryan Murphy doing Pose and all of these things where now trans actors and trans writers and trans directors are telling their own stories. So I don't know that necessarily plays now as much as it did 10 years ago.
Maybe, but I would say that there is an authenticity in Pose that there isn't in a lot of, sort of the ABC after school special. When you're trying to win, Pose, what I think works about it is that it's unapologetic, that it is.
And I think that's where we need to be.
Yeah, I agree.
It just is.
Yeah, it just is. And I also think we really need to get over this idea. And I totally understand the earlier pioneers because they're moving heaven now and they're trying to get financing and they're doing all this impossible. It's unimaginable how difficult. Literally, so at the end of the first option period, right when there was that big flurry of interest and then it fell through, and then once they picked it up, once these other producers picked it up and started taking it around, they said to me, literally everyone in Hollywood has read this project. Literally everyone, and they'd all said no, and so suddenly they had to go a different route in terms of financing. And so I don't want to be critical, but I do think the point of any movie is not to change hearts and minds. It's to be truthful and tell an authentic story and entertain and shine a light on some story that hasn't ever told before. And maybe it's two sides of the same coin, but I'm not sure that it is, because there was very much a vibe that we're going to save lives with this movie, that, we're this will be something that all of these teenagers can see themselves reflected. And that, again, that's not a bad thing, but I think, there was a lot of talk about how sexual they want it to be. And I mean, I'm kind of over the over-sexualization in gay movies. It's like, okay, we get it. You want to normalize gay sex. Now I kind of want to normalize gay love. I'm kind of tired of normalizing gay sex. Mm-hmm. But there was a sense that, we want this to be non-threatening. Again, like Love, Simon, which frankly, I don't really think worked as a movie. I don't really, but maybe the audience was, yeah. I mean, I thought it was sort of an after-school special, but maybe the timing was right. And maybe it was, Geography Club was too soon. Again, I'm not sure the movie completely hung together because it didn't have a third act. It's hard to explain, but anyway, it came out and it really sort of disappeared without a trace. And again, I think that's partly because it was a little retro, it was a little preachy, and it was, even then, before the times, the world wasn't ready for it. You didn't have this. I remember when Love, Simon came out, there was this social media, this sort of organic social media campaign that this movie needs to do well, so there'll be other movies, which is not a bad thing. That's a great thing. That didn't exist in the time of
social media wasn't where it was then.
Social media wasn't a thing. There was a lot of, so I wrote the book and it has sort of a bittersweet ending. The two partners, the two boys, do not end up together because of the major conflict in the book. And then I spent the next 10 years hearing from people, oh, why didn't they get together? Why didn't they get together? So when it came to the movie, I did say, I think the kids should get together at the end. I think, that is what the audience really wants and needs right now. And they didn't do that. I mean, ironically, they sort of stuck with the text on that issue. And I don't think that helped the movie either. I think audiences they really wanted a happy ending. They didn't want a bittersweet ending. They didn't want a kid doing the right thing but losing the guy because of it. They wanted the two kids to be together at the end. I don't know, it was an interesting process. Everybody's fumbling around in the dark and nobody knows what's going to hit until it hits. And, I mean, on one hand, it's sort of frustrating. I do think back on that other film producer that had the financing that had committed to using my script. And of course I think, well, what if only they'd done it my way, then maybe it would have been a breakout hit, but maybe it wouldn't have. I don't know that. Maybe the movie would have sucked. I think the movie looked great. I think the cast was great. And it sold a shitload of books. Interestingly, so it had a theatrical release. It was not, it was under 20 theaters, but it had a theatrical release because back then it was really important. And the only way you would get legitimate reviews, like in Variety and in the newspapers, is if you had at least a limited theatrical release. That's less true now, but still true now, but less true. So it did have the theatrical release. Didn't sell any books in the theatrical release, but then once it was available on Netflix, at the time, 29 million people can watch the movie for free. It sold a shitload of books, which then, it's part of a series, and it sold a lot of books. And again, I mean, they paid me a lot of money. It sold a lot of books. I wish the movie had done better. I wish it had.
So do you think it was a victim of its time? Because that's the flavor I got from watching the movie, because I love the books. And in fact, that's how I reached out to you initially, was because I loved your books. But my walk away from it was they missed the heart of what, I mean, that's the part it seemed like they papered over and moved to the other side of the story and tried to finish it out. That's what I missed. The thing I loved about your story is that it had a life, it had breath, it did do all of that. But the movie just seems a little disconnected from that element.
To me, my ultimate takeaway is, yeah, it was the wrong movie for that moment in time. They kept the retro plot, but they didn't keep, which I think the heart of the book is the friendships. I think the friendships between Russell and Min and Russell and Gunnar that's the heart of the book. And it felt like the characters seemed more generic to me, just sort of generic teenage characters. And then they had this retro plot. And I mean, I got a lot of comments from people like, why are they so afraid of coming out? And in 2013, coming out, I mean, you could argue that, well, sure, there are some high schools and rural areas where coming out is a big deal, and therefore the book is still relevant. And ironically, I have heard a lot, I get a lot of feedback from people in other countries, both about the original book and about the movie, so they really relate to it. What's happening there right now is what's happening in the United States in 1999 and 2003. But yeah, unfortunately, I think they missed the timing. I mean, as a writer, I really go back and forth. Are audiences wise or are audiences just totally stupid? You know, do they flock?
I think audiences want authenticity.
Yes.
No matter what time and whatever subject you're doing. I think that's the driving force. And if you stick to that.
I think they do, but I also think they fall for spectacle and you know, so it depends on the genre. Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, I get frustrated by, like, say, Cats is running for 30 years, and I thought it was just the worst play I'd ever seen. And I think, I don't understand audiences at all. But then you're right. I see other things where the audience zeroes right in. It's like there's a moment in a TV show, you know, Stranger Things. It captured, you know, at that moment in time, that moment of nostalgia, and yet making it universal. It was just like, oh my God, it was so perfect and so real and so honest. Mm-hmm. And I do think you're right. I think, as a writer, you're a fool to try to write to the spectacle, or to try to sell out. I mean, you know, unless you're an idiot and you're incapable of authenticity, you know, and if you're a soulless person, if you're not a good writer,
wrote fiction,
right? If your only option is to sell out and to go for spectacle, go for spectacle.
Right.
But I absolutely believe, and it does feel like sort of what
I think that's why queer characters are making inroads on everything, because people are realizing, just let it be. And if you just throw it out there, generally speaking, I mean, Star Trek now has 4 more queer characters in Star Trek Discovery. You know, so I'm just saying that, you know, I think that is where the audience is. As long as it's like not core to the message of the film, I think they'll take it.
We've also gotten beyond this idea, and I think this applies to racial minorities and you know, the disabled community and the gay community. Finally, we understand that there is no one gay experience. And now we can finally do what's interesting, which is show all these different authentic experiences from all these different points of view. But that's a really high hurdle to overcome, because if you don't know anything about gay people, you think, well, everybody, and then all you know is the stereotypes.
Right.
All you know about Black people is the stereotypes. All you know about disabled people is the stereotypes. And then there is this, understandably, because I was there's this idea on the part of writers, you want to up the pity factor because you want to win over the audience. You want to say to the audience, no, this is a really important issue that you should pay attention to, you know, because these people have these unique struggles. And so you want to, like, emphasize the tragedy and the struggle in order to inspire pity on the part of the audience. Well, okay, that works, but it's also really boring. You see that once, and it's also not really authentic because, you know, yes, part of the gay experience, maybe for everybody, and especially 20 years ago, there was an element of tragedy and repression and angst and frustration and misery. But there was also this, and this is what I was trying to capture in the book Geography Club, there's also this fun and humor and amusement, and the whole idea of a gay kid being surrounded by all these naked straight guys. I find that hilarious. And on one hand, it's terrifying. This gay kid is naked in a locker room with all these hot high school jocks, and he's terrified that he's going to be exposed and, you know, he might get a boner and all. But then you take a step back and you realize that's hilarious. You know what I mean? That's really funny. That, I mean, so it's like all these things are true at once. And to just emphasize the, oh my God, it's so hard to be gay and the experience is so awful and it's terrible. That's just such a limited part of the gay experience. And I mean, it was true. It was true even when I was 16.
It wasn't the whole story.
Right.
Yeah. No, it was, but I mean, that it was funny was true even when I was 16, you know, that it's just funny that you're surrounded by on one hand, you have everything you could ever imagine. You're seeing these incredibly hot guys. On the other hand, if anybody finds out, your life is basically over, and it's tragic and it's funny and it's.
I think part of it is that queer people see the irony of their situation.
Yes,
that's how it can be. That's how it can be all of that at the same time. You know?
Right, but if the mainstream audience has not been educated to what a gay person is, if their understanding of a gay person is somebody who molests children and lurks in the dark and has a ton of sex and doesn't know what it means to be loved, like anything and everything you wanted to know about sex but were afraid to ask. I don't know if you guys have read that back in the 70s, but it's just, whoa, it blows your mind to think that this is how people thought of gay people. I mean, somebody asked me the other day, a young person asked me, I was trying to explain what it was like to be gay in the 80s as a teenager. And the best thing I could think of was first of all, being gay was the most uncool thing you could be, just the most uncool. And I was trying to imagine what, and I said, if one of your friends, and we were in an urban area, and I said, if one of your friends was openly racist, how uncool it is to be racist if you're 16 right now, or to be transphobic, which is so ironic that the thing that was the most uncool thing in my lifetime, 40 years ago, the most uncool thing you could possibly be is now a cool thing, to be transgender and sort of to be edgy, to be gay, to be out and gay. But back then it was like the most uncool thing in the world. And I mean, you watch the movies from the 80s and the gay kid it's always a stereotype. He's always the butt of the joke. And it's like, that was representing, the ethic at the time. And so, I get frustrated, we've talked about this before, Baz. I get frustrated with people who don't understand how much the world has changed. And they're like frustrated. Well, why didn't you change it? Why did you accept this? Why did you accept this? And so first of all, A, I didn't accept it. I spent my whole life fighting it. And B, you don't understand how hard it was to be the only person fighting it. And that if you are exposed, your life is over. You could literally be killed. I had friends that literally were beat up in a way that they could have died. They could have died, and I could have died. And it's like, it's so easy to look back and say, oh, you were cowards and, you sell out all through the 90s. Why did you accept Don't Ask, Don't Tell? And it's like, oh my God, it was so complicated. But but the other part of me thinks, I'm glad you don't know that. I'm glad you take all this for granted. And I'm glad you just assume you should get full equality. Anything less than full equality is unacceptable.
It's what we fought for.
Yeah, that's literally what we fought for. I would like when they don't heap shit on me personally.
Right.
But that's part of the process. That's part of growing old. It's
interesting because this goes back to your previous point about not all gay experiences are the same. Here in San Diego, I came out in the early, well, actually it was probably like 1980 actually. And my experience was completely different.
Is that right?
High school was isolated in that kind of weird bubble, but I was smart enough that I had taken many classes in my lower level grades, freshman and sophomore and junior, so that by the time I got to senior year, I only had one class. I was in for 50 minutes and then I left and got out. So I was out mixing with older queer people. And so, I ended up being around two Black drag queens who showed me what fierceness was all about.
Right.
So for me, I was unapologetic, and I just, by sheer force of will, and I did some stupid shit that I should have easily been killed 9 times over, but it's because I think I just willed it to be. And this is due in big part to the Black drag queens that took me under their wing and taught me not to expect less, and so I think you're right. I think that's where things like Pose fits, because the authenticity and the driving of it from a queer POC point of view, a person of color, that has its own flavor and its own origin story and its own trajectory that isn't part of queer white perspective, and now we're getting to see those stories from that perspective.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, I mean, ultimately,
I do think Geography Club served a purpose.
Oh, yeah.
I sincerely believe that. And I liked the film on so many levels, casting, all that stuff that you mentioned. The thing for me that got to me the most as a fan of the books was they completely dissected the heart out of it. That was the part that there was a emotional punch I got from your writing of Russell and of Kevin. And I got certain things from the book that I just went, oh yes, this feels familiar. Yes, I remember these feelings. I remember. But in the movie, it seemed very paper dollish.
It's funny. I think, and I've thought a lot about this, I think ultimately art is forward-looking, good art, successful art. And I'm sure there are a zillion exceptions because there are no rules in art. But I think ultimately art has to be successful art that really has an impact is forward-looking, not backward-looking. And I think about, you watch like Woman of the Year with Katharine Hepburn from, I don't know, 1942. And it's like, they're talking about stuff we're still talking about today in terms of gender dynamics. It's like still relevant, and some of it is like out of date, but for the most part, it like holds up. I watch movies all the time from that era. And I think, yeah, that could be made today in a lot of ways. The lighting would be better, it would be in color, but, and then I watch movies, like Teen Wolf from the 80s. And they're making gay jokes, and they're playing to the moment in time. They're looking backward. They're playing the prejudices of the time, and it works at the time. It's really popular at the time because let's make fun of the fag. Look, he's a werewolf, but at least he's not a fag. Ha ha ha! How funny that is in 1984. And of course, from our point of view, it's like literally horrifying. It's like Gone with the Wind shit. It's like, this is so offensive. You're communicating. You're communicating to this to all the gay kids. How dare you? How dare you? But it's like, ultimately, it's like you can do that and you can make money. And it goes back to what I was saying before. If you want to play to the gimmick, if you want to play to the prejudices of that moment in time, you can do it and you can make money. And that's backward looking. Or you can be forward looking and you can try to imagine what the world is going to be like, and you can appeal to, basic human decency. If anybody on that set, had been motivated by basic human decency, they would have said, this is a cheap laugh. Maybe we shouldn't do this. And the movie would be better off, and they would all be better off today. And they would not all cringe. It's complicated because, some of the John Hughes movies, of course, there are cringe-inducing moments, and some of those things are, society had not just evolved, we didn't understand, some of the things. It's like, and then I guess you also have to put, I guess I would always say, John Hughes did so many things so right. And he, more than anything else in the world, he took the emotional lives of teenagers seriously. He didn't joke about it. It wasn't a punchline. So for me, in my mind, when I'm weighing, he gets so much cred. He's built up so much goodwill for that when they do an Oriental Gong, when the Chong character, and that's horror. Of course, it's horrifying, but it's like, you have to weigh the two things, and everything's a balancing act. And it probably would have been better if he hadn't done that, but he did this other thing so well. But ultimately, and I don't want to say what Geography Club did, the movie makers, they did nothing on that level at all.
Right.
But I do think they were looking backward in time, and they were, because it was a lot of 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds involved in production. They were, and because they were motivated by this idea, let's try to save lives, and they were thinking about their own teen experiences. So therefore they did something that spoke to a different moment in time. And I think on one hand, the hardest thing for a writer is also the easiest thing for a writer. Speak to now, speak to the future, speak to what's happening right now. And I mean, it's fun. So I've talked to you before, Baz, about this project, The Starfish Scream, which I wrote in 1998, and then it was optioned in 2007, and we're still working on it, and we were all set to go, and then COVID, fuck you, of course, of course. But it's like, so it's the story of, it's a gay story, but at the time when I wrote it, it was about coming out. It was about the struggles of being gay, but there were other things in the script. One of the characters is not necessarily gay. He's straight, and yet he has a gay relationship. but because, I would like to think that I was talking about fluid sexuality in 1998. It wasn't what I was emphasizing in 1998, but I was writing about that. I was writing about love is love. It's not about genitals. It's about people. And, it's about connection. All of this is about connection between two people. Do people connect? And 99% of the time, people don't connect. And when they do connect, that is, oh my God, that's why we all are alive. That's the moment we are all alive, for that connection. So I'm writing about fluid sexuality, and it's in the text. Of course, coming out, that's no longer relevant. So over the years, as I'm revising this script, it's like, okay, well, it's no longer about that, but there's this other thing in this script, that fluid sexuality and about love and about connection. Oh, so now the movie's about this. And again, I'm not like any genius writer, but I think because I was looking forward and I was in touch with what was going, this whole I get frustrated with young people, like they invented fluid sexuality. They invented the whole notion of, gender nonconformity. It's like, dude, we were talking about this as long as I've been alive.
And it was back in Harlem in the 20s they were talking about.
Yes, exactly. As long as human beings have, a friend of mine had a 4-year relationship with a gay guy, even though he's straight, and he ended up to get married, and he's not bisexual. He's straight, but he had a connection, in 1979 with this gay guy. Nobody had known him, and they had a relationship, a sexual relationship for 4 years. And it's like, this has just been part of human existence. And maybe for a lot of reasons, the gay community played it down, because we wanted gay to be a thing and it was no choice. And that was part of a strategy. I get all that. That's important. Again, I judge nothing, but it is amusing to me. They feel like, our generation, we're so binary. It's like, well, maybe some of us were, but some of us weren't. Some of us were never threatened by this. And I was writing about this in 1998. Again, I get no credit because I'm just writing what is my peer group. It's like, oh, right. Dude, that's really interesting. I'm going to write about that. It's not my personal experience, but I'm going to write about fluid sexuality. So here it is, 22 years later. Oh my God. 22 years later, I'm still working on the same project. And because I think I was looking forward and not backward, it's still relevant.
Tell Michael I appreciated the photobomb.
Photobomb.
I thought it was even in your face.
Well, at least it wasn't like John Barrowman's husband. So,
Right.
Take your wins.
Yeah, at least he was wearing underwear, right?
Right, exactly. Could have been worse.
Could have been a lot worse.
Yep.
Anyway,
okay, well, we're down to the last 5 minutes, so I guess we should probably start to aim towards wrapping it up.
Yes.
But I do appreciate you coming on and talking to us about this. And I do remember one thing you said on Wrote Podcast back when we were first talking about your journey dealing with Geography Club. And one of the things you made really, really that hit me, and it stuck with me, is that when you're a writer and your work gets optioned, two things. Just because it's optioned doesn't mean it will eventually get made. I remember that. And then the second thing was, if the script is not like your book, you still have your book.
Yeah. And
those are the two things that remained with me from our discussions about your journey on Wrote Podcast.
Yeah, and no matter how, and I don't want to say the movie Geography Club was bad, but no matter how the movie turns out, that's it's publicity and it's legitimization for the book in a way.
You got more sales, yeah.
Yeah, that's almost unimaginable. Yeah, it's really true.
So
yeah, I would never. I mean, it's funny what you said. I counted the other day, so I've had 12 things optioned over the years, and 2 have ended up as films, and maybe, God willing, 2 more in years ahead. But actually, no, I think it's 14. I just had another project. So it's like, yeah, the vast majority of things. And I mean, getting a movie made, people don't, Michael, would you mind? Getting a movie, he's like opening wrappers. Getting a movie made, having somebody spend anywhere from $1 to $5 to $10 million on something you've written is unimaginably difficult. One of the producers that I'm working on with the Starfish Screen project, he said they're not going to give us $3.5 million to go play around in the backyard. They're going to want to make money. They're going to want to plan. They're going to want a market. They're going to want to, and so it's like, on one hand, that doesn't mean I think we should blindly support. You know, as a consumer, I want good stuff, and I'm not willing to accept just because something is gay, just because they worked hard. Ultimately, the proof is in the pudding. I want to be touched. I want to be moved. I want to feel like it's authentic. At the same time, as a creator, I realize it is so goddamn hard getting anything made, and that's a lot of money, millions of dollars. It's a lot of money, and so it's like I recognize you have to make compromises. It's just I judge nothing. I judge no one. Everybody's just it's all a big hustle, and everybody's just trying to do what it takes to get it made and then get it marketed and then get it seen. And we all have to be, I mean, you know, I want to have an open mind and an open heart. I want to approach everything. But ultimately, you know, I want to be moved and I want to be touched. I mean, we're all wearing our big boy pants, you know, as creators, you don't really get any bonus points for working hard. It doesn't matter that I've been working on this project for 22 years. And if it comes out and it's a piece of shit, that's the way it is. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And we are all wearing our big boy pants. And, you know, people say bitchy things, people say mean things. And I mean, one of the things that drives me crazy about, you know, people will review Geography Club now and they'll say, oh, that's such a cliche. And it's like, yeah, it's a cliche because I made it a cliche. It wasn't a cliche when I wrote it. Give me a goddamn break. But ultimately, I don't care. You know, ultimately that doesn't matter. It is a cliche and it's time to move on. And, you know, I can get a little bit of credit or not, and I can take some satisfaction or not, and ultimately I move on to the next project. And I so far in my career, I can sleep well at night. I'm incredibly frustrated by things that haven't happened. I've got a lot of pleasure when people tell me something touched them in some sort of small way. And, you know, ultimately I've been able to do what I love for more than 25 years now. And you know, I really can't complain. And I mean, it is what it is. It's a cold, brutal business. You know, art is hard. Most art fails. 90% of art, 90% of my art fails, but the 10% of the time when it doesn't fail makes all of the misery, on a good day, makes all of the misery worthwhile.
Excellent.
Very
well,
cool.
Brent, thank you so much for coming on here and talking with us about that journey. I think there's a lot of takeaways for creators, especially in the career market. So, you know, we are so indebted to you for, you know, talking to us about the project and the journey on it. And I think there are a lot of things for other creators to think about, you know.
Well, I appreciate that you guys are, you know, mining the past for wisdom about the future. You know, you look backward and you are
that's what we're trying to do here.
That it is all a relay race. It's all connected and everybody is all together in this. And yeah, and I really appreciate that.
All right, thank you.
Well, thank you again.
All right.
Hey, everybody. So now we're back for the review portion of the movie. And I'm actually going to be smart about it this time, Vance. I actually have my IMDb page.
You prepared.
I prepared. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah.
All right. So people probably got a little bit of the plot from Brent if they haven't seen it already. A little
bit, but it's not everything. You know, so.
Right. So do you want to do it or do you want me to?
You'll give it a go.
All right. Geography Club. About a boy, Russell Middlebrook, who is in the closet, but has, through the magic of technology, agreed to meet someone in a park, but it kind of ends up a missed meeting, except the guy who was supposed to, Kevin, the quarterback of the football team, did see him.
Right.
So fast forward to a science trip, Kevin asks him for help, and they have their first kiss, but it's seen by a third person, dun, 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 who leaves them a note and says, meet in room 327 later. And Russell goes, Kevin doesn't. Russell finds out it is masquerading as the Geography Club, but it is really 3 other gay, lesbian, bi students who are just hanging out and being friends. He's not quite ready to be out. He still wants to pursue Kevin. Kevin gets him on the football team. Shenanigans ensue. Meanwhile, Russell's best friend Gunnar is really trying to date the hot blonde queen of the school, and so tries to drag Russell into dating the queen's best friend. That goes poorly. More shenanigans ensue. and then he gets outed. Russell gets outed, I should say. And there's some fallout from that. He handles it gracefully. It helps bring the Geography Club out publicly. And spoiler alert, Kevin decides to not come out. So there is an ending where Russell has found himself and Kevin has not.
Yeah, the happy ending is all about Russell being okay with himself.
Correct.
Yeah, it's self-love kind of HEA.
And
Which,
really
I appreciate it.
I love those stories too. The thing I really need to stress here is that is the film plot. That is not the plot Brent wrote in the books.
Right. I like the cast, aside from what Brent gave us about one of them being a 29-year-old, and my husband constantly, why is that 40-year-old carrying a backpack?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you watch Vampire Diaries, and he goes, I said, God, they're all drinking. They drink so much. That's a terrible thing for teenagers. My husband goes, he says, well, they're all 45, so why don't they drink?
Right.
So, yeah. So aside from that, yeah.
I mean, my impression, kind of everything Brent mentioned was my takeaway. It was sort of generic. I hadn't really put together the "we're saving lives" element until he said it just now. But once he said
the timing makes sense, yeah.
But yeah, the timing makes sense. But I did see that, and he's right. It was borderline preachy. I mean, it didn't actually come out in preach, but I felt like it was definitely his after-school special.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I go back to, there was an episode of Family with Kristen McNichol back in the day where, she kind of liked this boy, and her character did. And you come to find out that he's gay, and then he commits suicide. Standard fare for the 80s,
Sure.
Bury your gays. And there was an element of this in the movie version. And I truly loved the books. I loved the books. That's how I came to know Brent, because I reached out to him and to tell him that I loved his books. But the thing that really kind of gets to me about the movie is, one, and Brent explained it, the casting of the adults, and then even throwing in Alex Newell, who was hot in Glee at the moment, and he's thrown in there, and that character doesn't really exist in the books, and it's a shoe-in, and so for me, that took me out of the movie completely. His casting, it didn't matter if he played it good, bad, indifferent. I was taken out of the movie by the fact that I know that they had shoehorned him in because he was big on Glee at the time.
Right.
And that was a real, and then the fact that I'm looking now on IMDb, and anybody can check this out for themselves, on IMDb, they put the big name of Scott Bakula in there, and you look at the list, and he's not on the list. Right. I'm just like, and a gas tire rates, but no Scott Bakula. So what was that all about? Why throw that out there? And to be fair to Mr. Bakula, he has always been a solid ally for the community. He goes, there. He's, he even was in Looking for a period of time. So I mean, he's not willing. It's not like it's a struggle for him to do these kinds of projects. So
right.
All props to him. But I just think he was completely wasted in this movie.
Yeah. Well, like Brent said, they weren't supposed to be adults at all.
Right.
I feel like his part was written in so Russell could say to Kevin later in the movie, "You've got the best father in town."
Yeah.
That was literally why I felt like he was there, just so that Russell could say that later.
Yeah. And yet, if you took the line out of the movie, there'd be no reason for him. So really,
right.
And it's really funny because, when you think of Scott Bakula, Geography Club is not one of the things that pops to mind. It just doesn't,
Right.
So it's, yeah. I mean, even on a gas tire, until I saw the name on it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's who played her. I mean, they were throwaway roles, and I get it. I get the whole thing of, how it had to be made, and Brent's journey during it, but at the same time, there were a few films that were coming out that were actually starting to gain or garner some notice, and You know, so it's unfortunate. I do think it was a victim of its time.
Oh yeah.
The movie, not the books. The movie was a victim of its time. I would love to see it be remade with the original intent, because I think queer kids would identify with it and they would go with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, obviously they're going to have to update the tech. You know, that chat thing on the, you know, that was hokey even for them. You know?
Yes.
That was like 1998 graphics on a computer. You know, but you know, I do love the lead for Russell. I thought he was well cast. I liked the way he played it. He played it with just the right kind of writing that line of "do I or don't I come out," you know, kind of thing, and acknowledging his own feelings and that kind of stuff. You know, and I do like the lesbian in the geography club group. You know, I love her. Cool. Yeah. You know, and I think that's what queer kids need to see, them in their own environment, supporting one another and being fierce about it, you know. And I think that's what kids nowadays would respond to. You know, you go on social media anywhere, you've got all these queer kids who have huge followings. You know, YouTube, look at Tyler Oakley. He made an entire empire out of just being totally the gay boy best friend to all these teenage girls, you know, and you know, now he's a daddy, you know, so I mean, go figure, you know. So, you know, I and it's interesting because there's another, actually, it's funny because I'm looking at my IMDb list, and the first movie, you know, how they have that bar that has all the recommended movies like it.
Yeah.
Perks of a Wallflower is up there with Ezra Miller, and I loved him in that movie. And I really like that movie because the queerdom was a factor in it, and it even was from the bullying perspective. But I think that one hit the mark much more, and I think it can be more timeless because of the way it was presented. Whereas I think what does Geography Club, the movie, the disservice is that it played into its own victimhood.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And Brent's books are funny. They're well written. They're humorous. You know, so yeah, that was, I think, what made it a disconnect for me, was that it could have been easily a 4-quill movie for me. I'm pushing it at 3, which is where I am with it. I don't know where you are with it, but
I'm like a 2.5. I mean, I don't love teen drama anyway, so it's not a genre I run to. Everything we just discussed, its datedness, it, you know, the way information was presented, the changes to the script didn't push me over the edge. That said, it's still an enjoyable story. If you want to see a time capsule of the era,
yeah.
it's a good one for that. It's
literally is a time capsule. I mean, and it's, you know, and if anything, you know, it would give queer kids an appreciation for how social media, which came right after this kind of thing, that how much of an effect social media had a year or so later.
Right.
And what a different movie this would have been if it had just been pushed out 2 more years. What a different film it would have been.
Yep.
You know, so on that, you know, we're going to leave it, you know, so we're going to put this one in our vault. I now have a graphic for the vault and I put them in the vault now. So you'll be seeing that up here. And, you know, so we'll put them in the vault. I do an average between it. And I actually now on every episode, right after we roll the credits on this thing, I actually show you the current standings for where we are with all the movies along our little barred graph. So you know exactly where they're all hitting. Just as a reminder, so maybe there's a review for a movie you haven't watched of ours yet. So that'll give you a chance to pick up on those reviews as they come out. So
sweet. What are we watching next?
We are watching my favorite on the list, Call Me by Your Name.
Ah, I haven't seen that yet.
Yes. It's a controversial film for the gay community. For many reasons. I didn't have a problem with it personally, and I think part of that is because somewhat to a certain degree, it was my experience during the 80s that I mean, I wasn't in Italy, you know, I don't speak 5 languages, so I mean, that's that part, you know, but I was a skinny runt like he was, you know, like Timothy Chalamet was. So I do, there's an element to it that I completely identify with. And I know what Timothy was shooting for. And it was really my love affair with him as an actor. I now follow him religiously. If he's in something, I will watch it. So, yeah, looking forward to Call Me By Your Name. Make sure to like, subscribe, tell your friends. Our mission just started to skyrocket in views. We went from 9 to 58 overnight. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, just like, you know, and for us with a new channel, I'll take it. I mean, that's a boost, you know. We got more subscribers. So, you know, tell your friends, like, comment, you know, leave comments for us. If you have a differing point of view, we'd like to know that, because we can then respond to you and kind of have a little bit of conversation going on. This is supposed to be an interactive kind of thing. We give you our perspective and you chime in and tell us if you think differently and why. All right. So you can send them to info@ropepodcast.com, or you can post them down in the comments here and we will respond to it. Okay. So until next time, remember to vote. At the time when we're taping this, it is, you know, voting is still a thing.
Yo.
Vote, plan your vote, take someone who can't get out to vote. Wash your hands.
Don't touch your face.
Don't touch your face. Wear a mask. Socially distance. God, I feel like one of those airline stewardesses that exits. Wash your hands. Socially distance.
Thank you for
wear
playing
a mask.
Podcast.
We need to have a guy going.
Yeah, right. But we promise not to lose your luggage.
There you go. All right, guys. We'll see you next week. Okay. Bye.
Bye.